Welcome to the show called Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. This is the show where we talk about everything homeschooling, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We want to affirm and encourage you in the decision to homeschool, challenge and inspire you to take it to new heights, and celebrate everything you get to experience along the way in this adventure of a lifetime. I'm your host, Davis Carman, and today our guest is Sherri Seligson. We want to remind you, our listening audience, that you can now watch us on YouTube. We've been doing this for about a year, or you can continue listening on your favorite podcast app. Okay, Sherri, let's talk homeschool.
Sounds great.
Welcome to the show. So, I've known you for a long time. You've been a long-time author and partner with Apologia, but I want to make sure our audience knows some of the textbooks you've authored, some of the video courses that you're the talent and the teacher on. So tell everybody a little bit about your family, your homeschool background, and your connection with Apologia.
Okay, so I began working as a marine biologist at Walt Disney World's Living Seas Pavilion at Epcot before we had kids. Then I got promoted to mom, and we have four children, and we homeschooled them all kindergarten all the way through high school. Taught science co-ops to homeschool families, and then connected with Apologia because I just love Apologia's materials. And I have authored the Apologia General Science course for middle school, the marine biology course for high school, and then I do the instructional videos that go with our middle school courses and a majority of our high school courses: biology, chemistry, marine biology, human anatomy. Am I missing one? The human body, advanced biology. And so just enjoy that. I love going to places to see science in action and bringing that to students and helping them to understand God's fingerprints and design in his creation. So love science.
Fantastic. And it's great having you a part of the Apologia team. You've been a stable for a long time. So through the years, your specialty is marine biology, but when you were working as a marine biologist before you started homeschooling your kids, tell us about some experiences you had there that later influenced you on how best to teach science at home.
It's interesting. Of course, the subject of marine biology, most people love. It's a interesting field, and there's weird and fascinating animals. And so as I was working, especially at Disney, we would get lots of families coming through asking questions, and the marvel that they had of the animals. They would be just in awe of the uniqueness, the features, whether it was a dolphin or a manatee or a shark or some of the behavioral things that they saw. And we would be having these conversations, and they just kept asking more questions and more questions and more questions. And I realized that the interest and the awe, the fascination comes from something that then you want to sparks learning. They want to learn more. And so not that we have to do as homeschool moms song and dance, interpretive dances, or whatever to get our kids' attention, but we want to pique their interest by asking interesting questions or delving into something that's unique or different or fun. And then the questions will come, and then the learning starts happening. Even if we don't know the answer, we can say, "That's a great question. Let's go find out." And then that kind of helped me in my teaching skills, I guess you would call it. I didn't think I had any teaching skills as a new homeschool mom, but in helping to just develop the wonder and build on that wonder, because then the questions come and then the learning happens.
Yeah, so much learning happens when good questions are answered, just curious questions by
That's right.
young kids really display that well, and we can often lose the art of asking good questions and listening carefully to answer, and as a result, learning. So, but we generally ask questions because we don't know something we want to learn. So
Right.
your specialty is marine biology, but I'm sure there's other subjects that you taught during the years that you didn't feel quite the expertise on. So how did you were you intimidated by by those subjects when you came across? I don't know what your non-specialties are, but how did you handle the tension personally when you ran across subjects that you weren't an expert in?
Well, I prayed a lot, which I think is the most important thing. But understanding that we can't know everything about everything, and even professional educators don't know everything about everything. It's okay to not know, and I had to accept that because I felt like I had to know it all, and I finally began to understand that we are learning through this process as homeschool parents along with our kids. And so, just like I said before, you don't have to know the answer to some of these questions. You can say, let's find out. I mean, I remember even in the younger years, history, I did had a very bad history education growing up. Writing, terrible writing, because most of your writing grammar happens in middle school. We moved a lot during that time. I went to four different middle schools, so
Mm.
I just didn't have a lot, and so I felt very intimidated by that. But asking questions, talking to other homeschool families, looking for good curriculum, and understanding that what I don't know, I can learn along with my kids. Little did I know, having to teach grammar and vocabulary and writing to four children four different times through those middle school years, I got a great education in writing. And who knew I was going to be writing curriculum? So the Lord knew and He prepared me. And I think that's ultimately what it is, understanding that we can trust the Lord in providing what we need when we need it. You're going to have, if you have multiple kids, each one's going to have a different experience. They may not have the same co-op teacher or class or situation, and we feel like we need to provide the same thing for each one, but God knows what each child needs. And we have to trust that He will provide what they need to prepare them for what He has for them in the future. And so I needed that reminder regularly. I think we all do. But it is so true because I can look back now that my kids are grown and see how God provided for them what academics they needed, what character education they needed, what kinds of things through the things that we were doing in our lives. And I see His hand in it. And it's such a blessing to know that He had it. I didn't have to do it all. And that was my comfort.
Well, I was half expecting you to say that the author, like yourself, of the textbook is the secret sauce. Because one of the things we touted Apologia is that the textbook is the teacher. It's written differently than your traditional, school textbook. It's knowing that it's probably the student reading the book. So it's written to them in a conversational style. And so we often tell people that you don't have to be an expert in marine biology. The textbook will teach your child through it in a sense, an independent learner. And that's
Absolutely.
one of the gifts we are teaching our kids as we ask the questions, as we learn together with them, and then they learn how to learn. And they learn the joy of it, the love of learning. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful process altogether. And then even as you mentioned, just to see how our own life story gets shaped by homeschooling, and you're not a good writer, and then you're writing textbooks because you were teaching your kids together.
Yeah, I remember my kids, like even this is elementary school years, and we're reading something about history or whatever, and I'd say, "That's amazing! I didn't know that." And I realized I must have been saying it a lot because the kids were like, "Did you even go to school, Mom?" And it's like, well, you can't learn everything about everything, and
Right.
it was I was learning things in a more fascinating way in our homeschool arena. So just like Apologia, the conversations that we had together, like our books, they draw out conversation, which then piques interest and makes it interesting. And so we had fascinating conversations, and the book
Right.
would provide something that I didn't know this. This is great. Let's look this up more and let's go into it. So it's a great model for education, and it's a great model for science books as well.
Right. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of enjoyable moments. We had the great years, the tough years, the years in between. But is there any uh, moment you remember in your children's homeschool journey, maybe a science project, an experiment, or just one of those aha moments that you can think back on and remember right now that just kind of bring a smile to your face?
Oh yeah. There's plenty. But especially, and you probably know this as well, your grown kids will come back visiting all together and they start reminiscing about their growing up years. And a lot of
Yeah.
times it's just they start laughing about things that we did as a homeschool family. And I remember one time in particular, this is something that I think most homeschool parents exhibit. Everything becomes a field trip. I mean, really,
Yes.
everything's educational. And we live in Florida. And so we would go to the beach regularly just for relaxing or whatever. And my daughter said one day, Mom, can we just go to the beach once and it not be a field trip? And I'm like, oh, I'm just we have to look at this algae right here. We have to look at this fish over here because everything's educational. I mean, we would go on a family vacation, we would go on a day trip to the mall or whatever, and I would find something cool, whether it was a historical marker, it was all educational. And I just think, oh yeah, I kind of made everything super educational because learning is a lifestyle and it was our lifestyle. And yes, my children, even today, cannot go to the beach with me without it being a field trip.
Well, I think what you're saying is it just opens up our eyes to pay attention to the world around us. And so often we can miss the awe and wonder of creation, even if we're not technically learning, just to pay attention and observe and to notice, wow, isn't it interesting how the crab walks? I want to pay attention to it and just watch it for a while. So
Yes.
moments like that, and kids, have that natural born curiosity. They're not bound by a clock necessarily, and they can just sit and watch something for a long period of time. Whereas we can often get distracted and want to move on to something more important or serious. At least it feels that way.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So even just now, as we're talking, the awe and wonder of science, um, you mentioned that. I mean, our textbooks are creation based, and you've written these textbooks from a creation based perspective that God created it, and now let's study marine biology, knowing that God made these life forms and animals and water creatures. But was there a moment, whether in the lab, on the beach, or with your kids, where you really saw that curiosity just come alive in a way that it hadn't before?
Yeah, there are several of those as well. With our kids, let's go back to the beach. Whenever I go to the beach, I bring a bucket and a net, a hand net, because whenever there's algae floating in the water, other swimmers will swim away from it. I go toward it to scoop it up and see what's in there. And one day we found a seahorse and a couple of beautiful frogfish, and we were shaking it out in the bucket of water. And kids, of course, and on the beach come over, what's in your bucket? And they start seeing the animals. And my children started telling them about it. And then they'd say, Mom, what's that thing called? Or what is this? And they just felt so empowered. And they were wondering, what's this thing, Mom? And so it was like this group random co-op that came together and all these kids who didn't know each other, they were just hanging on the beach, and then the parents come over, what's going on? And we had this, my kids just started exploring how much they knew. They realized how much they knew. Or if they didn't know, they would talk about, well, what is this thing here and how does that work? And so they kind of owned that moment. And I realized this is what curiosity does. This is where we want to foster that the wonder and the curiosity, asking questions. And you mentioned observations. I think some of the greatest thinkers out that have ever been were observers. You know, science, one of the first things you do is as a scientist is you observe. You have to be able to observe around you. Writers and poets and orators, they have to observe the world around them. And so by teaching our children those observations, like looking at whether it's the butterfly or I don't know, their hand and moving like this, and why does my hand do this? The questions come because of the observations, and then the wonder and the curiosity. And so that to me is the natural flow of how we want education. Ideally, it doesn't always look like that day to day in our
Right.
homeschool, but as the big picture, when we need to step back, which we need to do often, and take in the big picture of what we do as homeschoolers, we want to foster a love for learning. We want to have lifetime learners. And how do we do that? We just have these natural conversations that build curiosity. And again, that's what I love that we do at Apologia. We have ask a lot of questions in our books because we want to pique the curiosity, and then we delve into the answers, so that they can see that process of learning and
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, so much of what you just described is the scientific method, in a very layman term, so to speak. Just the question, the answer, the observation, and then test it out and see if this happens the next time.
Right.
So it's interesting. You talk about when you went to the beach, you took a bucket and a net, and we live in North Carolina. We're not, on the beach. We're 3.5 hours away, but we go to the beach regularly, and we always take a bucket and a net because we go crabbing and we collect
Oh,
as many crabs as we can. and then we just kind of look at them on top of each other and dump the bucket, and then they scatter, and everybody's feet, it's just like, oh, that was our science at the
Tradition.
beach.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Why do they crawl sideways? That's always my kids' debates. Why do they do that? Yeah.
I personally am still fascinated by the animals that dig under the sand. They're clearly there. You can see bubbles. I I'm very curious about just how what their life looks like, but we can save that for another,
Okay.
scientific
Yeah, that's a whole
class.
ecosystem down there. Yes.
Uh, so we've talked a lot about I'll say the academics, marine biology, other subjects that we want to teach our kids in the homeschool journey. Some that we're maybe more experts on than other subjects. But in all of this, how can parents foster some meaningful conversations about faith, especially in the context of science, since that's what we're really talking about here? But we don't want them to just learn the information. But how do we incorporate and foster conversations that bring faith into the discussion with our kids?
Yeah, there's actually I like to use three words: order, complexity, and beauty.
Okay.
When we see order in the world, it points to a designer who made it. When we see complexity, or information, something that carries information. So if you're walking in a path in the forest and you see a giant boulder and the word hello is carved into it, those etchings carry information that means something to you. So, and you know that that word wasn't randomly cracked into the rock from a
Mhm.
falling limb from a tree or something else. You couldn't even throw rocks at it randomly to get that to happen. So you know it carries information. And when we seek that order, that organization of information, it points to a creator. And that's where we can see complexity and order everywhere. You look at the whorls of a unfurling fern or a rose that opens up and the design of that or how a plant will move towards the light versus away from when it wants the sun. When we see the complexity of a single celled organism like a bacterium and all the pieces in there and just show them a list of terms that we label all those things and say that's complex. That didn't pop up out of nothing. So that part of it. And then you add beauty to it. And in the uh, um, randomness, if things happened randomly without a creator, beauty is not something that would be a part of that because there's no benefit to survival for beauty. So when we look at the sunset and the beautiful colors of a sunset, we can wonder and awe. I mean, how many people don't stop and look at a gorgeous sunset, right? If you go to the beach, you're going to see the sunset. You go to the mountains, there's a sunset. It's gorgeous. We don't see the animals doing that. The squirrel's not going to stop in his tracks and go, "Ooh, look at that sunset." It's not helpful for that squirrel to survive. We've been made in God's image. And so we understand beauty because God understands beauty. God is a God of beauty and design and proportion. The I love one of my favorites numbers 1.6, which is the golden
Yeah.
rectangle, and that we see that in the spiral galaxies and in even Michelangelo carvings. There's that proportion of that spiral rectangle. So that design and order is beautiful. And so all of those things help us to understand that there's a creator. And then if there is indeed a creator, which we do know, what does that mean for me? Who am I? I was made, and so I'm valuable. I'm important. God has a purpose for me. What is that? And how can I know him? And so that's how the faith conversations can come from wondrous science conversations. And I don't think you can have one without the other. I think if you can't talk about science without talking about faith because creation screams design and God's creation. So his glory.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally thinking of something I found in my yard yesterday. It was a large feather, about 12 inches long. The quill was a quarter inch thick. And I picked it up. The bird was nowhere to be found. But I'm just looking at this feather and I'm thinking, this is an amazing piece of the bird itself. If I was just in awe of this feather, and I kept
Yes.
playing with it, and I put it on my desk because it was also beautiful, as you're saying. But it was as simple as it was complex, it was orderly. We know what feathers do for birds, and yeah, I mean, when you look at creation that way, I couldn't help but think of God as I was holding this feather, of all
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's too organized to not have a designer, too
yeah,
specialized, too perfect in design, not partly designed, not in transition to something else. It is
mhm,
done as it
yeah,
should be. Yeah.
yeah. That's great, and I think that's the encouragement for the parents listening right now is as you're teaching science, math, Bible, history, language arts, uh, learn the joy of learning, the joy of reading, the joy of asking questions and having relationships with your kids as you're doing this learning. But also remember that part of why we're learning is to discover the creator of it all. And so you can incorporate good conversations about faith and God and Christianity as you're studying, pick a topic. History, it's God's history. Language arts, God created language. Science, all of creation is His. So it's a good reminder that you're giving us that we don't have to force those conversations. They can come very naturally.
Absolutely.
So you are one of the authors, and we get so many positive comments about the video instruction courses you've done because you are really good at taking complex concepts like some of these math concepts and engaging in a way that makes it something that the students can learn, but that the parents can be confident of what's going on. So, what do you have a process for turning rigorous, difficult science topics into something that homeschool families and students can teach confidently and learn, with some confidence?
Yeah, I think one thing, and I love that Apologia does this, we don't shy away from scientific terminology. They're just words. And so even in our elementary books, we use the same, 6 letter word, 9 letter word, 12 letter words, because, if you've ever talked to a 5-year-old dinosaur enthusiast, they can say all the sauruses that are out there. They know all that stuff. They're not afraid of those words. So we don't have to make those scary. We just speak them as if they're words. And then when it comes to concepts and processes, I look for analogies. One of the best ways to understand something is to take something that you know and connect it with something that you don't know. And so the process then becomes understandable. So for example, let's talk about polar molecules in chemistry. Just, something like what does that even mean? And so when you have two atoms and one atom has a stronger drawing force to the electrons that orbit it than the other one, and they're bonded together, it's like a tug of war between a football player and a 3-year-old. Who's going to pull that rope stronger? The larger guy, right? He's got his greater strength. So the greater strength atom is going to have more pull of those electrons. So they're going to spend more of their time orbiting that atom than the little guy. And that's a concept of tug of war that kids understand, that adults understand. And yet it applies to the process of a polar molecule. If the electrons are spending all their time over on the strong guy, that side's going to have more electrons on it. That side's going to be more negative charged because they're over there. And so giving visual connections using analogies, which is why in those elementary years, give your kids lots of experiences in a lot of different things: jumping, running, playgrounds, reading, exploring, painting, everything, because they're building their knowledge base of the world. So then they can make analogies for understanding harder to understand concepts. And so that's what I love to do. When I can find a tangible, um, concrete example of something that's abstract, which a lot of science processes can be abstract because we can't see them. It helps us to understand it better, to learn it as well as to teach it. And so we include that. I include that whenever I can in the videos, even in our books. We try to include those examples as much as we can to help kids grasp an abstract concept because it's
Yeah.
graspable, and you don't have to be an Einstein to understand it, believe it or not. They're basic concepts that we just have to take those words and make the process more and more embraceable. And so that's my goal. That's my process. Sometimes I just talk out loud to other people, trying to explain it to them, and they ask me questions like, "What do you mean by that?" And I'm like, thinking, 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 and that helps me to get my juices flowing too.
Right, right. Well, and yeah, and analogies are a skill that we can all learn, we can relate to. They do help us start to understand, the actual concept in question. Not all analogies, are perfect and work out
Nope.
exactly right, but they give you a taste of what you're trying to learn. And then once you have enough dots connected, then you can maybe learn some of the more details that are involved in the actual subject you're looking at, like the polar bonds that you were talking about.
Right. And a lot of times we'll build models of something.
Mm.
And whenever we can build a model, I try to do it with food because there's some excitement for kids. So we build models, and those are some of those are even some of the activities and experiments in our courses where you're going to build a model of the layers of the ocean. Let's make a parfait.
Mhm.
Use different colors. And when you build models, you actually have more tangible memory of what those parts are. And again, it adds to the that knowledge base on that
Right.
subject. So we
I,
love to do that too.
I have an attic full of science projects that my kids did through the years that are exactly that. They got into the projects because it was hands-on. It actually helped make the concept make sense for them finally as they started putting together whatever they were, a model of an atom, a model of the solar system, a model of, a sea, ecosystem. And well, I got one with one of my daughters did a model of a mushroom. And it was fascinating trying to, for her to figure out all the pieces and parts to make it as accurate as possible.
Yeah, even in history, and you can do that. You can make models of castles and trebuchets
Mm-hmm.
and all the different things, clothing that they wore, all kinds of stuff. So there's that. That's a great tangible way to provide education.
No,
We
that's
try to do that as
excellent.
much as we can.
That's
Yeah.
very practical ideas there. So I'm sure you made some mistakes along the way. We sure did. So what are some common mistakes that homeschool families make when teaching science, and what would you suggest to help them avoid some of those, most common mistakes?
I think that's a good question. I think one is sticking to um, sticking to a requirement that you think is put on you that doesn't fit your student. For
Mm,
example, if you're on a lesson plan and it's telling you, take this test today, and your child is just not ready for the test, you have the freedom to say, let's not do that today. Or you have a child who is easily distractible or writing is not their strength. Do it orally. You don't have to do something one way. And that's one of the beauties of homeschooling. We know our kids, we know their strengths, we know their struggles, just like I have strengths and struggles. And so we can help to tailor their science education, their whole education, to better meet their abilities where they are. So, one of my children has dysgraphia, which is a processing thing in writing. Okay, I didn't even know what it was until he was in 11th grade. I just knew he had a process that was an issue. And so we did writing in writing class. But whenever we were doing any other subject, we minimized the writing because I knew it was a struggle for him. So we did things orally. I had him type things on a computer. I had him do things with his brothers and sisters, so that it still fostered the education without having to force him to do something that was such a struggle for him. And we have that freedom. We give you guides, and at Apologia, we give you guides, we give you lesson plans, but those are guides that you can use as the backbone of your homeschool, and then you can flex and you can say, this is we're going to the ocean this week. Let's switch over to the ocean chapter right now because we're going there now. It makes more sense. So those are the things that I struggled with that. I like to be in the box. Tell me what to do. I'm going to do it and it's done and I can check it off. And the freedom to say, this is also good. This is in the box too. My box for my family, for my kid that works better. And so that box over there says, take the test today. My box right now
mm,
says, this child needs another couple days to review it, or let's do it this way and or that way. And so that's kind of the struggles, one of the struggles. I had many. I mean, we all do.
mm.
What would we do differently? A lot of things, probably, if I could go back. But that was one of them, particularly with science, because I was so afraid I was going to mess it up. I was so afraid I was going to ruin them, or miss something, or not teach something accurately. And so, understanding that I could flex, and if I didn't know what to do, talking to my student about it, especially as they get older, involve them in that
Mhm.
conversation. let them own some of this, saying this is a part of your education. You need to learn certain things. Just like, there's certain things in life you don't like to do, and you got to do them, like
Right.
taxes. We got to do them. We have to learn the skill of having to do that. And so how can we go through this process together? And how can we make it something that you can do? And what would make it easier or more embraceable for you? And the option of not doing it may not be there, but how? And so involving them in that conversation as they get older, they start to own it then. And then you can cheer them on as they're succeeding and you're a part of it. They're a part of it. You're working together as a family.
No, no, that is so good, especially on being flexible. Because I mean, we're all grateful for the freedom to homeschool, but once you accept that freedom and start, taking on the responsibility, don't put yourself in a new box. Feel the freedom within that box
Yeah.
to you know, to
Make your own boxes out
exactly,
of food.
exactly.
That's
I mean,
right.
just and that can be a paradigm shift for families to who are either task oriented or they feel like there's only one right way to do this. I mean, one of the things I love about homeschooling is not only can you teach to the individual child, but every homeschool family is going to be very unique and different to compared to other families. So, don't compare yourself to other folks. Just do what God is calling you to do. Be creative, uh, be flexible, and feel that freedom.
Yeah.
And along the way, since you're going to be spending so much time with your kids, get to know them. What makes them tick? What learning weaknesses they have that they need to overcome? What learning strengths do they need to capitalize on? So I never knew that I would know my children as well as I did by way of homeschooling, but you end up spending a lot of time together and learning their learning styles, and that ends up being just a beautiful and enjoyable part of the homeschool experience.
It does. It does. You get to know them and they get to know you.
Yeah.
It's just the opportunity to share in wonder, to share in questions, to share in hardships with them, to show them, hey, I struggle over here,
Yeah.
and I would appreciate your prayers, and I'm going to pray for you on this thing, and that's part of that helping them to grow, that growth in maturity as they learn to become independent
Mhm.
in their education and independent in their lives. I mean, our goal is to launch them. Our goal is to do that. We don't want,
Yeah.
45-year-old Cheeto eating game players in our houses if possible. And so we want them to do whatever God has to their best potential, whatever that is. And so um, helping them to see that we're walking that journey too is an important part. The relationship. I never expected that was one of the best things about homeschooling, but relationships,
Mhm.
my kids with each other, me with them, has just been one of the best things. One of the best
Totally
things.
agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's turned out to be an unexpected blessing. That it was much bigger than I ever anticipated it could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, Sherry, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you share with our audience today?
No, we hit most of the points. I guess the biggest thing is in your homeschool journey to just relax and step back. Step back often and reassess where you're going. Get your bearings. I tell homeschool moms this all the time. Public and private school teachers have teacher planning days a lot. We don't ever get those. I try to get those. I try to swap with another mom watching kids just to step back and review to get the vision, because we lose our vision so easily when we're in the midst of it. And this time of year in particular, right now we're, coming off of winter, everybody's just like shriveled up and waiting for the end of school. It's real, and yet you have done a lot more than you think. Your
Mhm.
progress is not necessarily all academic, but a lot more academic than you think it will be too. So having that perspective, stepping back, having that perspective and just
Yeah.
praying that God would give you wisdom on what to do just tomorrow, just for the next hour even, uh, is sometimes where we are.
No,
But
that is great.
it's worthwhile. It's hard, but it's so worthwhile.
No, excellent. Sherry, thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, we always have to bring these wonderful conversations to a close. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us again next time. This has been Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. I've been your host, Davis Carman, with our guest, Sherri Seligson. Have a great day, and until next time, we're walking by faith and enjoying the homeschool adventure of a lifetime.